And let's get back into Nellie-Rubina from Mary Poppins Comes Back. This has been so long since I read, I can't remember what chapter this even is. It is chapter, flipping through the pages, 9. So, Jane and Michael are discussing their recent visit with Mary Poppins, with Nellie-Rubina and her family, all of whom appear to be made out of wood. And Jane says, "I think something is going to happen at 10 o'clock tonight, and I'm going to stay awake and see." "And so will I," said Michael. "Come along, please, keep up," said Mary Poppins. "I haven't all day to waste." Jane was dreaming deeply, and in her dreams somebody was calling her name in a small, urgent voice. She sat up with a start to find Michael standing beside her in his pajamas. "You said you'd stay awake," he whispered accusingly. "What? Where? Why? Oh, it's you, Michael. Well, you said you would too." "Listen," he said. There was a sound of somebody tiptoeing in the next room. Jane drew in her breath sharply. "Quick! Get back into bed. Pretend to be asleep. Hurry!" With a bound, Michael was under the blankets. In the darkness, he and Jane held their breath, listening. From the other nursery, the door opened stealthily. The thin gap of light widened and grew larger. A head came round the edge and peered into the room. Then somebody slipped through and silently shut the door behind her. Mary Poppins, wrapped in her fur coat and holding her shoes in her hands, tiptoed through their room. They lay still, listening to her steps hurrying down the stairs. Far away, the key of the front door scraped in its lock. There was a scurry of steps in the garden path, and the front gate clicked. And at that moment a clock struck 10. Out of bed they sprang and rushed into the other nursery, where the windows opened on the park. The night was black and splendid, lit with high swinging stars, but tonight it was not stars they were looking for. If Mary Poppins' conversation had really been a message, there was something more interesting to be seen. "Look!" Jane gave a little gulp of excitement and pointed. Over in the park, just by the entrance gate, stood the curious arc-shaped building, loosely moored to a tree trunk. "But how did it get there?" said Michael, staring. "It was at the other side of the park this morning." Jane didn't reply. She was too busy watching. The roof of the ark was open, and on top of the ladder stood Nellie-Rubina, balancing on her round disc. From inside, Uncle Dodger was handing up to her a bundle after bundle of painted wooden branches. "Ready, Miss Poppins?" tinkled Nellie-Rubina, passing an armful down to Mary Poppins, who was standing on the deck waiting to receive them. The air was so clear and still that Jane and Michael, crouched in the window seat, could hear every word. Suddenly there was a loud noise inside the ark as a wooden shape clattered to the floor. "Uncle Dodger! Please be careful! Please, they're fragile!" said Nellie-Rubina sternly, and Uncle Dodger, as he lifted out a pile of painted clouds, replied apologetically, "Begging your pardon, my dear." A flock of wooden sheep came next, all very stiff and solid, and last of all the birds, butterflies, and flowers. "That's the lot," said Uncle Dodger, heaving himself up through the open roof. Under his arm he carried the wooden cuckoo, now entirely covered with gray paint, and in his hand swung a large green paint pot. "Very well," said Nellie-Rubina. "Now if you're ready, Miss Poppins, we'll begin." And then began one of the strangest pieces of work Jane and Michael had ever seen. Never, never, they thought, would they forget it, even if they lived to be 90. From the pile of painted wood, Nellie-Rubina and Mary Poppins each took a long spray of leaves, and leaping into the air, attached them swiftly to the naked frosty branches of the trees. The sprays seemed to clip on easily, for it did not take more than a minute to attach them, and as each was slipped into place, Uncle Dodger would spring up and neatly dab a spot of green paint at the point where the spray joined the tree. "My goodness, goodness!" exclaimed Jane as Nellie-Rubina sailed lightly up to the top of a tall poplar and fixed a large branch there, but Michael was too astonished to say anything. All over the park went the three, jumping up to the tallest branch as if they were on springs, and in no time every tree in the park was decked out with wooden sprays of leaves neatly finished off with dabs of paint from Uncle Dodger's brush. Every now and then Jane and Michael heard Nellie-Rubina's shrill voice crying, "Uncle Dodger, be careful!" and Uncle Dodger's voice begging her pardon. And now Nellie-Rubina and Mary Poppins took up in their arms the flat white wooden clouds. With these they soared higher than ever before, shooting right above the trees and pressing the clouds carefully against the sky. They're sticking! They're sticking! Cried Michael excitedly, dancing on the window seat, and sure enough, against the sparkling, darkling sky, the flat white clouds stuck fast. Whoop! Cried Nellie-Rubina as she swooped down. Now for the sheep! Very carefully, on a snowy strip of lawn, they set up the wooden flock, huddling the larger sheep together with the stiff white lambs among them. "We're getting on," Jane and Michael heard Mary Poppins say, as she put the last lamb on its legs. "I don't know what we'd have done without you, Miss Poppins, indeed I don't," said Nellie-Rubina pleasantly. Then, in quite a different voice, "Flowers, please, Uncle Dodger, and look sharp." "Here, my dear." He rolled hurriedly up to her, his apron bulging with snowdrops, scallas, and aconites. "Oh, look, look!" Jane cried, hugging herself delightedly, for Nellie-Rubina was sticking the wooden shapes round the edge of an empty flower bed. Round and round she rolled, planting her wooden border, and reaching up her hand again and again for a fresh flower from Uncle Dodger's apron. "That's neat," said Mary Poppins admiringly, and Jane and Michael were astonished at the pleasant, friendly tone of her voice. "Yes, isn't it?" trilled Nellie-Rubina, brushing the snow from her hands. "Quite a sight. What's left, Uncle Dodger?" "The birds, my dear, and the butterflies." He held out his apron. Nellie-Rubina and Mary Poppins seized the remaining wooden shapes and ran swiftly about the park, setting the birds on branches or in nests, and tossing the butterflies into the air. And the curious thing was that they stayed there, poised above the earth, their bright patches of paint showing clearly in the starlight. "There, I think that's all," said Nellie-Rubina, standing still on her disc. With her hands on her hips, she gazed round at her handiwork. "One thing more, my dear," said Uncle Dodger, and rather unevenly, as though the evening's work had made him feel old and tired, he bowed toward the ash tree near the park gate. He bowled toward the ash tree near the park gates. He took the cuckoo from under his arm and set it on a branch among the wooden leaves. "There, my bunny, there, my dove," he said, nodding his head at the bird. "Uncle Dodger, when will you learn that it's not a dove, it's a cuckoo?" He bent his head humbly. "A dove of a cuckoo, that's what I meant. Begging your pardon, my dear." "Well, now, Mary Poppins, I'm afraid we must really be going," said Nellie-Rubina, rolling toward Mary Poppins. She took the pink face between her two woodeny hands and kissed it. "See you soon, tra-la!" she cried airily, bowling along the deck of the Ark and up the little ladder. At the top, she turned and waved her hand jerkily to Mary Poppins. Then, with a woodeny clatter, she leapt down and disappeared inside. "Uncle Dodger! Come along, don't keep me waiting," her thin voice floated back. "Coming, my dear, coming, begging your pardon." Uncle Dodger rolled toward the deck, shaking hands with Mary Poppins on the way. The wooden cuckoo stared out from its leafy branch. He flung it a sad, affectionate glance. Then his flat disc rose in the air and echoed woodenly as he landed inside. The roof flew down and shut with a click. "Let her go!" came Nellie-Rubina's shrill command from within. Mary Poppins stepped forward and unwound the mooring rope from the tree. It was immediately drawn in through one of the windows. "Make way there, please! Make way!" shouted Nellie-Rubina. Mary Poppins stepped back hurriedly. Michael clutched Jane's arm excitedly. "They're off!" he cried, as the Ark rose from the ground and moved top-heavily above the snow. Up it went, rocking drunkenly between the trees. Then it steadied itself and passed lightly up and over the topmost boughs. A jerky arm waved downwards from one of the windows, but before Jane and Michael could be certain whether it was Nellie-Rubina or Uncle Dodger's, the Ark swept into the starlit air, and a corner of the house hid it from view. Mary Poppins stood for a moment by the park gates, waving her woolen gloves. Then she came hurrying across the lane and up the garden path. The front door key scraped in the lock. A cautious footstep creaked on the stairs. "Back to bed, quick," said Jane. "She mustn't find us here." Down from the window seat and through the door they fled, and with 2 quick jumps landed in their beds. They had just time to put the bedclothes over their heads before Mary Poppins opened the door quietly and tiptoed through. Zup! That was her coat being hung on the hook. Crackle! That was her hat rustling down into its paper bag. And they heard no more, for by the time she had undressed and climbed into her camp bed, Jane and Michael had huddled down under the blankets and were fast asleep. "Cuckoo! Cuckoo! Cuckoo!" Across the lane the soft bird note came floating. "Jumping giraffes!" cried Mr. Banks as he lathered his face. "The spring is here!" And he flung down his shaving brush and rushed out into the garden. He gave one look at it, and then, flinging back his head, he made a trumpet with his hands. "Jane, Michael, John, Barbara," he called up to the nursery windows. "Come down, the snow's gone, and spring has come." They came tumbling downstairs, and